In this lesson titled Creating and Customizing Tables, we're in Workbook Lesson 04, Format Data, and we're in the Worksheet tab titled Tables. Many times people who are working in Excel assume that because they're on a worksheet, they're also working with tables. This information we see here, for instance, is a range of data. I'm going to select it all here. It's a range of data. And it is not its own entity. Each one of these items is completely independent of each other. It's true that Excel does a very good job of recognizing some of the information around it and making some very clever decisions because of that. And in the previous lessons, we talked a little bit about some of those features. But in order for Excel to see all of this data together as one entity, it needs to be created as a table. There's a couple of very easy ways to do that. So we can select anywhere in this range of data, and we can go to the Insert tab, and we can choose Table. And it'll say Create Table, ? And it says, do you want this range? And it shows us the range here with this animated marquee. It also shows us the range here. And this is very important. It also asks us the question, my table has headers. So I do have headers. I have the name of each column up here. That's considered the header. And so I'm going to click OK. Now we could get the exact same thing by just clicking anywhere in the data and hitting Control T on the keyboard. That's a great quick shortcut. Control T. It's pretty easy to remember. T for table. Well, as soon as you create your table, suddenly everything looks different, doesn't it? Because by default, it's going to apply a table style. In this case, it's lit up here in gray, a table style. And if we look at this drop-down box right here, we'll see there is a lot of table styles to choose from. The feature that I love is that I can hover over it and I can see what it's going to look like before I even choose it. So I'm going to just go right here to this light blue and dark blue, and you can see here that each table style has a name. This is called Blue Table Style Medium 9. So you might be in an exam or something and someone says, I want that table style to be Blue Table Style Medium 9. And it's because they actually have names. So I'm going to select that. And so here we have our table. Now, you probably noticed we got a contextual tab as soon as we selected the table. So I'm going to click away, and our tab disappears. I click back into our table, and I have Table Tools, and I have Design tab, which is currently lit up here. It's in white. This is one way to tell if something is a table. You can click in it, because sometimes it's hard to tell. And if you get a Design tab, then it is a table. So let's look at what we can do with our Design tab. Most of what we're going to do is just right here in the Table Style Options. And we have lots of options here. There is 7 options, and let's look at each one. Header row. Well, we do have a header row, and if I uncheck it, it disappears. It's not there anymore. What about total row? If I click it, at the very bottom, I get a total row. Now, this isn't just a kind of a graphical gimmick. This is actually a very useful row that's been introduced here. Do you see here it says total and job ratings right now? It's totaling them up. Well, totaling up the job ratings is not very useful, is it? So what we can do is we can actually select that cell, and to the right we have a drop-down arrow, and we can change it from sum to maybe something more useful like average. And now we see what the average is. Now we have a lot of decimals here, but we learned in an earlier lesson that you can decrease those decimals quite easily. I won't bother with those right now. Well, again, if you have a total row active, every time you click in a cell, you get the down arrow. So I have seen individuals in the past, they're like, well, where is the arrow? I want to click the drop down arrow. Well, you have to click on the cell first in order to get that drop down arrow. So over here we might not want it to say total because maybe we want to count these, or we can leave the total here. That might be useful there. Let's come over here to this compensation, and here we might want to know, well, what is our total compensation? What is it costing us for every employee? And there's our number. There's our total row. And it's kind of interesting that you can just click on your design tab and you can just make that go away if you want, and it's all gone with one click. And here we have banded rows and banded columns. So you can see it's even kind of giving you an idea. So we currently already have banded rows, and sure enough, banded rows is selected. So let's try unchecking that and checking banded columns. So now we have our same style but with banded columns. So this is the same style. If I roll over, it's still blue, table style medium 9. It's just that now it's columns. In fact, you'll notice I have a display here showing all columns currently. So that's pretty handy as well. Let's go back to what I already had. Now, every once in a while someone gets tempted to do banded rows and banded columns, and you can see it doesn't quite work. So I'm just going to go with banded columns. And here we have first column and last column. Well, this refers to the emphasis that we can place on the first column and on the last column. So let's try first column, and you can see that the color gets dark in the background and it gets bolded. Same thing here, last column. Now, these are different depending on the style that you've chosen. So if I was to go to a different style, say something like this, you can see that it didn't really change the color in the background, did it, for last and first. So it kind of depends what you have. Here it's bolded, but here it's also just bolded, but it also has just the light color that's part of the banded columns. So let's go back here, and we'll go back to this style I had before. So I'm going to turn that off and just keep, maybe I'll keep the first column. I kind of like that. Now we have one more choice here, and this is called the filter button. So we have filters by default at the top of all of our columns, and these filters are very useful. For instance, I can click on one of them and I can say I don't want to see 1 and 2 job ratings because I just want to look at some of our better job ratings. So this is an idea of a filter. I uncheck those and say OK, and all those numbers are gone. I only have 3 through 5 now. And the icon has changed right here, and it's showing a little funnel symbol that represents filtering. So I'm going to check on that, and I'm going to go back to select all. I also can sort from here. I can sort smallest to largest or largest to smallest. Let's try that, and there's a sort, and you can see that all the corresponding data changed with it. So all of these rows changed position. So very powerful. We can even search for things. Let's say we had a list of a couple of 100, let's say, and I could actually come down here into search, and I could say DI, and it would find only those names that started with DI, and it only found one, and that was here, Diane, because I couldn't quite remember, is it Diane or Diana? But with a search, I could quickly see it right there, and I could select it even from right here, say OK, and that's the only one that's visible. So up here we see I have a filter icon, so I know I'm filtering there. I can do select all, and I can say OK. If it's a relatively short list, you could check and uncheck the items that you don't want to see. So I'm going to say OK, and everything returns again. A couple of more neat features when you're dealing with tables. Because it knows it's a table, it will automatically add any adjacent information. If I come here and start typing Timothy, and I hit Tab to accept or enter, it automatically added it to my table with all the same formatting. In fact, there is some sort of calculation happening here, perhaps, or maybe this is the data left over. but it's already part of a formula. You can see it's using a dated if formula, and it's already putting in that information, trying to figure it out for me. So I can delete that there. So even the formulas got added to the information. Very powerful. Let's come over here, and we could add something like new salary, because maybe we're going to calculate a new salary. I'll enter to accept, and it gave it the formatting, and everything was put in here. So very powerful tool for tables. Now, one more little thing. There's a tiny little icon right here at the bottom of our table, and you can actually grab that, and you can extend the table this way or extend the table this way. I'm just going to pull it down. You can actually get some more room to start entering your data. I'm going to delete those. It's just part of a calculation that got added. So very powerful. Once you create a table, Excel will start looking at it as an entity. So tables are very powerful. I'm going to resize this. And just keep in mind, when you create a table, Excel now considers this a complete entity. Another thing I need to say about tables is sometimes you might think, I'm not seeing any of my design commands, right? Well, that's because I did select a table, but I'm over on the Home tab currently. You will need to click on the Design tab in order to see your features. Now, what do we do if we don't want a table anymore? There are times when a table is not very useful. For instance, if you wanted to merge several cells together, maybe the top of the table you want to just simply be a title, and you want to merge all of these cells together, well, you can't merge cells in a table. So let's see about converting it back to a range. So all I do is select somewhere in my table and click Convert to Range. It says, are you sure you want to do that? And we say yes. And you'll see that the information that we had hid before has all returned. The thing I tried to add on the end, this Timothy, is all by itself now. And if I click in the table, it's no longer a table. I no longer have my table tools and my design tab. That's gone. Well, there's some very clever things you can do, and you want to format it very quickly but not turn it into a table. You can just simply turn it into a table, format it, and then turn it back into a table again. So because I have this formatting and you've decided that you don't want the formatting either, remember you can highlight all of your data, and you can come over here to your clear, do a down arrow, and you can say clear formats. Now we want to be careful and not click on clear all. That will actually delete all of your data. But clear formats will get rid of everything. So I click on that, and we have all of our data. So you can see how useful it could be to just simply put your cursor in somewhere, hit Control-T for table, pick a format, and then just turn it back into a range again, and you have all of that formatting that you liked. Let's clean this up just a little bit and turn it right back into a table again to talk about something called slicers. I'm going to click here and get rid of that name, get rid of new salary column right there. Now I'm just going to put my cursor anywhere in the data. I'm going to hit Control-T. It says, is this the area you want? I'm going to say yes, and also that I have headers. Say OK. And there's our table. Make sure we have selected under Table Tools our Design tab. And now let's look at a feature called Insert Slicer. So I'm going to come over here to Insert Slicer and just simply click. And so these are actually the column headers, right? We can choose all of these for different slicers. So let me just give you an example. I'm going to choose Employee Name, and I'm going to choose Building and say OK. And what it created for me were what are called slicers, and they are named after the categories or our column headers. So I have Employee Name over here, and I have Building over here. Slicers act a little bit like filters, only they are more like a dashboard. I'm going to move these over here. This one I'm going to make a little bit smaller, so I just click on it and I can get rid of this white space. I can also make sure it's active, and I now have a slicer tools where I can choose different colors. And there we go. So I have two slicers. Let's just show you quickly how slicers work. Like I said, they're kind of like a filter. So for instance, I could choose David and Michael or Stephen, and you see that's all I see here. Or I can hold down my control key and I can choose several names. And now all of those are showing. I'm going to come down here with my control key and select down here. And to get David as well. So these names are selected. Now you'll notice over here on building that these two are kind of grayed out. They're a lighter color. It's because we currently don't have any names that are in these buildings, so it's not even an option. So over here now I have a little red X, which means get rid of my filtering. So everything's selected. And now over here I can filter by building. I can say I want the Bean building. I can hold down my control key and add the North building and the Main building. So very easy to use slicers as type of a control panel. And you can be really quite creative with them. If I select on one of them here, I'm going to select the building and I'm going to uncheck my filter, so I select all and then come up here to my slicer tool options. And we can even change how many columns there are. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 buildings. So I'm going to give it 5 columns. And just kind of show you what this does. Come over here. I'm going to enlarge this a little bit. And I can shrink this down a little bit here. And now it looks almost more like a control bar, doesn't it? I can maybe even pull this out over here. And all I have to do is click on these and I can see whatever building I want to see. The Main building has the most, and North has some, and West has some. So you can be very creative with these slicer bars. You can change the colors they use. You can change the columns they have and height and width, but you can also just grab the corners. One more thing here, I use Control to select these, but you can also use this command right here, multi-select. If you select that, it's the same as holding down your control key, and it lets you select multiple ones and turn off multiple ones just by clicking. That's the multiple select tool, and I can uncheck that to go back to my regular mode. So these are slicers. You can play around with those, and they're a lot of fun to experiment with and maybe turn them into control panels by changing the number of columns they have to give them a different look and even a different color.